Hi, welcome to Book Buzz. This is a conversation with your Beebe librarians, and I'm here today with Jackie Powers, who's our assistant director, and Karen Stern, who's a reference librarian, and also she does the lion's share of our programming. And my name is Leanne Ellis. I'm a Reader's Advisory Librarian and reference librarian at the Beebe Library. At the end of this program, you'll see a list of the books we talk about and anything we might mention as well. So we're going to do what we really enjoy doing most of the time when we get a chance, talk about books. So I'd like to start with you, Jackie. What have you been reading?
I just finished Gabriels Events' Young Jane Young. She is best known for The Storied Life of A.J. Fickrey, which I believe one of our book groups just read.
Yes, Books by the Lake is actually discussing
They're about to discuss it next time. Yeah.
So it's very timely. The reason I decided to talk about this one, it's first of all, it's fresh in my mind, and it's very timely. It's with all that's going on in the world with sexual harassment and all that. This book fits right in.
Oh.
Essentially, it's about a woman who, in her very early 20s, has an affair with her boss, who is a married congressman. And she takes the fall for it. She ends up, getting all the backlash. Nothing happens. He just goes right on with his life, and it's fine.
Sounds sort of true.
Yeah. It's got shades of Monica Lewinsky in a different way. But she ends up having to literally leave the state. This all happens in Florida. She ends up in Maine with a completely new name and basically cuts ties with her entire family over it. And so the book talks about what happened to her, and she a lot of the plot revolves around her trying to get into politics herself later in life, which is what she had wanted to do all along. She has a fantastic daughter that she's a single mother, and her daughter is just an incredible character, very quirky, and it reads a lot like, if you're a fan of Liam Moriarty, it's kind of that same style in that there's this sort of heavy topic that's there, but you're not weighed down by it. It's not cloying or overly sentimental. It doesn't the kind of sweet parts aren't saccharine sweet. It's just real.
Do you feel like she tackles the topic the way you
does.
want her to? You come out satisfied about that?
Yes. Yes, very much so. And while the ending is not totally resolved, you feel like she's sort of come to terms with her past and accepted what happened, what happened to her and her role in it. And it's told from different perspectives. It starts off with her mother's perspective, and she's this, retired Jewish woman living in Florida, and she's hilarious. And the way she talks about how this all happened is like one perspective, and then you get the main characters and you get the daughters. It's really well done, and it's if you were to compare it to A.J. Fickrey, for her other most popular book, the writing style is the same, but it's got much broader appeal, I think, because the topic is so timely.
Well, yeah, it does sound like it is timely. She's got her start as a young adult writer.
Right.
Probably her most prominent young adult book is Elsewhere, which is an amazing write in itself. It takes place with a young person who dies and what happens when she dies. But what I always remember after reading that book thinking is that she's got a deft sense of dialogue.
Yes.
She's able to push the story very well through that, and she does the same thing in Fickrey, I think.
Yeah, I think that's. I've only read Fickrey, but I just read it as well, and it's like you said, she has a light touch, which makes it easy to deal with some of the more difficult issues. So.
Yeah, it's light, but it's not manipulative.
No.
And I think that's a very high standard that you want a writer to have.
I mean, and that's what Liam Moriarty, truly excels at. That's where she shines, and this is very reminiscent of that.
Oh, good. Well, that goes on my list.
Yes, I'd highly recommend it.
Yeah,
terrific.
It's a good read.
Now, for something a little different, Karen, I know you've been reading some interesting
I have. It is
popular
a
fiction,
little different, but it's also timely, you could say. I'm actually going to talk about two books which have similar themes, but are very different in style. So the first one is called American War by Omar Aleck, and the second one is called The End We Start From by Megan Hunter. The first one is quite a good-sized book. The second one, Hunter, is, as you can see, a slim volume. And so the differences in style kind of start right there. But both of them, what they have in common is the fact that they are both what I guess people are starting to call cli-fi. Have you heard about cli-fi?
Cli-fi. No, it's new. Oh.
It's climate. It's things to do with climate fiction. So I mean, and I don't want to go too far into that because that is really just the backdrop for. So these are things where climate change has produced a certain conditions that then make the story happen.
Are they kind of dystopian?
A little bit. They're more speculative fiction. So it's speculative fiction is when you take today's world and you say, what if? What if this happened?
If these conditions continue.
So if these conditions continued in this way, what if, what would happen? And so this is a case where what if climate change got to the point where in the Akkad, it's where the sea levels have risen, coastal cities are gone. There are actually climate refugees who, have moved. The capital is now in Ohio. Southern states are bone dry, and they've banned the government has banned fossil fuels, and a few of the southern states have rebelled and refused, and it's become basically a second civil war. So, excuse me, so that's the climate backdrop for that one. And in Megan Hunter's, it's actually set in London. She's a British author, and it's flood in that one. She, the day that her first child is born, she and her husband are forced to flee. She and the new baby are forced to flee because of catastrophic flooding in London, and they flee to the north where his parents live. So these are the settings, and that I guess is cli-fi.
Just by looking at this, I can tell this is a small book, and I know that the Akkad is more probably that size or a little bit bigger.
Yep.
So I'm thinking there's a bit of a style change.
Oh yeah. So Omar Al-Akkad is he's a journalist, and he certainly writes in that if you like nonfiction, you could read this on almost as, there's a lot of character in it, but actually I found that was one of my criticisms of it, was the character took a little while to kick in, and I read for character, so that was a little bit of a thing for me, but he certainly lays the background in a very repertorial way, and he intersperses the action with sort of what you might find in a historical archive, like little write-ups of certain conversations in the Senate or whatever, so that you kind of get some of the political background and things like that. So yeah, there's much more detail and background in the Akkad, and but then there's the character, and he basically is positing this idea of what happens when you're forced from your home. You think about places like Afghanistan, you think about Syria, you think about many of the African countries that have wars and the refugees that happen. You don't think about it happening here, so he puts it here, right here at home, and it's totally believable. And he says, what happens when a family loses their father and is forced to flee their home, ends up in a refugee camp at the border of Tennessee, like just thinking that, right? A refugee camp on the border of Tennessee. And this young girl, very smart young girl, who is essentially turned into a terrorist because of the conditions. She's a Southerner, and she.
Because people who grow up in the United States and have lived here all our lives, we're very blessed. We don't understand that concept. So this gives us an opportunity to put the others' shoes on.
Yeah, completely. It gives you a real chance, and he takes you through the whole. She's 6 when it starts, and it takes you through this whole move to the flight to that ends up in the refugee camp, and her relationships with her family, and how she gradually becomes this mysterious character who arrives and sort of turns her into what she becomes. So I'll leave it at that. And then I'll tell you that this one's completely different. This one, meaning the end we start from again, is in the form of a diary. So imagine now imagine you're a young parent, your first time parent. You've never, you're experiencing this whole new world just because you've had a baby, and you're swept from your home. And as anyone who's ever had a baby knows, you're very, very involved with the minutia of life. Like, you have nothing to focus. You can't focus on anything except like when the next diaper needs to be changed, the next feeding.
You're like, oh, I need to eat at
Yes,
some point.
yes. And so does the baby. And, and so everything in this book is told. It's almost diary entries. Beautiful. She's a poet, the author. So they're these beautifully crafted short entries, as if that's all she has time to write, because she's fleeing, she's taking care of a child, she's, and the relationships are between her and her family are central. But it's told from that it's instead of the akkad, which is this big palette, this is very, very personal and kind of broad brush, because it can only be done here and there, and in these diary entries, it's this weird combination of personal and big and sparse.
And would you say that it's more introspective?
Yes, absolutely.
Commenting more on what's happening to them personally rather than the world at large. But you can't escape the world at large when you're in that situation.
No, you're absolutely right. It's absolutely more personal, but at the same time, it's not navel gazing in any way at all. It's much more like if you were writing, how. I know I never kept a diary, but if you've ever kept a diary, a lot of people who do it, it's journals. It's just literally what happened today. So it's oddly removed from the intense emotions that she must have been going through, because what happens, and without giving too much away, is one by one her family starts to be taken away for different reasons. And so this happens in these little. You just dip in, and then you're gone for a day or two, and then you dip in again, and something else has happened. And so it's really interesting, really beautifully done. It reminds me of Otsuka's Buddha in the Attic. Do you remember that one?
Yes, that's another little tiny gem.
Yeah.
And that's little bits and pieces, right?
It's little bits and pieces of people's stories, and they're just short, and they're very beautifully written, poetic, and they give you this kind of impressionistic piece, and that's a little bit what this is like.
Right. And it's interesting because when she's writing like that, my impression is that the emotion is something that you get because it is so diurnal, so every day. You know what I mean? You don't expect to be affected by it, but you are.
Exactly. It's not like she's writing out, I feel horrified or scared or terrified, but you know that she must be, and you feel these basic relationships being torn from her.
It almost gives you the opportunity to feel, to be more empathetic, because she's not telling you how she feels.
Yes,
exactly.
So
you can put yourself in her shoes in a way,
shoes.
and I think that's what she probably set out to do. And the author, I've heard her interviewed, and she said she set out to do something, different, and that was part of her reason for writing the book, because she wanted it to not be your average read, and it isn't. But
Was this a first for her?
It's a first novel. She's published poetry, and I think maybe some other stuff, but as far as novels go, yeah.
And when you've been talking about both those books, it reminded me of the Station 11. The Emily Mandel.
That's where I was going, and I couldn't think of what I was thinking.
And that certainly is more developed
than this one.
in the sense that there's
It's
more
somewhere
narrative
between the two.
continuity. Yeah, but it's somewhere between the two. And throughout the thing, one of the things I loved about that was the way she uses the Shakespeare play to sort of tie certain thematic things together and sort of amplify characters.
But it's that same, because it's here, I mean, you can certainly read stories about, refugees in Sudan and wherever, and you can try and empathize with them, but there's still a remove. I mean, it's not happening here. And when you read something that just conceivably could happen here, it's a whole different.
And even this being in London, it's still very Western world. It's what we're used to. It feels like it could be here too.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the wars, for us being such a big country, isolated, it's easy for all that to become an abstract, and these books bring it home in a way that
We do that. I mean, even for people, that live in other parts of the country, it's easy to be like, well, that's happening in Texas.
Right.
Right. No, that's very true. That's very, very true. I think we all tend to do that. It can't happen to us. It can't
It's
happen
different
here.
here, yeah.
It's
Right.
something that I think we need to revisit and rethink that thought.
Could it happen in Prague?
It could happen in Prague. It did happen in Prague. No, yes, and obviously you're pointing to my book.